The Old West is full of stories about rustlers, bandits, and Indian raiders when the law of the land lay in the six-shooter strapped to your hip. Law enforcement in those days came in the form of the U.S. Army, stationed in a series of forts running the length of the Rio Grande and across the territory of New Mexico. I'm Cheryl Falstead.
And I'm Bud Russo, and we'll be your guides. Let's step back in time to explore Fort Selden.
Attention, company. Right base. By files right, march.
Fort Selden was one of those frontier forts and is the closest remaining fort to Las Cruces.
Fort Selden was designated in 1973 as one of 6 New Mexico state monuments, more than a century after it was established to protect settlers and travelers in the Mesilla Valley from desperados and Apache Indians. It's located about 20 miles north of Las Cruces.
New Mexico became a territory shortly after the end of the Mexican-American War in 1848. Despite its new legal status, New Mexico remained virtually a lawless land, a situation that promised to get worse before it got better.
In 1863, Lieutenant Colonel Nelson Davis arrived, intent on building a fort to protect Las Cruces, Doña Ana, and Mesilla. He found a point of land along the Rio Grande with good water and cottonwoods. It was an ideal location for watching traffic along El Camino Real and the road through Faulkner Canyon to Silver City in the west. And so the Fort Selden Military Reservation was founded.
And by 1865, several hundred infantry and cavalry troops were stationed at Fort Selden, including the African-American troops of the 125th Regiment, men whom the native people called Buffalo Soldiers. Life was never easy at a frontier fort. When not standing guard or on patrol, soldiers always had animals to care for and gear that needed constant attention.
Only the wives of officers were allowed to live on base, and if the officer was transferred at the Army's expense, he was responsible for the cost of moving his family. And the men were frequently rotated from fort to fort to break the monotony of routine, but they scarcely had time to learn the land and the enemy before they were transferred.
Fort Selden's standing rose and fell over the next 20 years, depending, in part, on the intensity of raids in the area. The railroad arrived in 1880, and it was no longer necessary to maintain the long line of forts. Fort Selden was left to deteriorate.
In 1884, Captain Arthur MacArthur was assigned to Fort Selden. He came with his wife Mary, who was fondly called Pinky, and their son Douglas, destined to become General of the Army during World War II. Even though MacArthur rebuilt the fort, it was finally abandoned in 1891 and continued to deteriorate until the 1960s.
State and local visionaries saw a part of local history melting away along with the adobe walls, and the state monument was established. What you can see today at Fort Selden are the remains of the adobe buildings that once housed the troops, along with their horses and mules.
There's a small museum at the Visitor Center with a collection of artifacts and memorabilia of life at this frontier fort. On the second weekend of nearly every month, the fort hosts reenactors who dress in period uniforms, display and demonstrate weapons, and share their knowledge of 19th century military life with visitors.
Every Mother's Day, friends of Fort Selden conduct a tea, and on Father's Day, there's a chuck wagon breakfast.
During the holiday season, Fort Selden is decked out with hundreds of luminarias, and volunteers in costume lead candlelight tours. Perhaps Fort Selden's most important event is Frontier Days, held in early September.
Over the weekend, visitors can observe reenactors setting up field camp, engaging in historic military ceremonies like raising the colors and infantry training.
There are talks about various aspects of fort history, rounders games, and even cannon firing demonstrations.
Gun 1, ready? Gun 1, fire! Gun number 2, ready? Gun 2, fire! Gun number 3, ready? Gun number 3, fire! Gun number 1, ready? Gun 1, fire!
Fort Selden is about 1.5 miles west of Interstate 25 at Radium Springs Exit 19. The fort is open daily except Tuesdays from 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. Admission is $3 for those 16 and older.
This podcast was sponsored by the Las Cruces Convention and Visitors Bureau
And produced by Explore New Mexico.